Good morning and welcome to week 5 of What Our World Really Needs. For those of you that haven't joined us and this is your first morning here, let's just quickly recap what we went through. Week 1, Tian shared with us that the Holy Spirit was given to us not so we could be more spiritual, but so we could be more mature. Then week 2, Jesus promised that a consistent, constant, and steady joy can be ours. And fortunately, He also tells us how. Week 3, Jesus never said life would be easy, but He did promise us a path that leads to peace. And then last week, Leslie did a great job of sharing the following with us. We all have a little bit of patience, but we also know how limited it can be. How do we increase our capacity for patience? And why does it matter? So if any of those messages resonated with you, or the opposite, the hairs on the back of your neck stood up, then maybe you need to go and watch these messages, because I'm sure there's something in there for you. And that's why we are sold out Jesus followers, because we don't just read the Bible for the sake of reading something, but we read it and then we go and we apply it. And that's our purpose with this series, is to really delve into the fruits of the Spirit and to discover what that application means for us. Because when we talk about what our world really needs, what we're saying is we need more people that are Christ-like. And what's important is what is Christ-like is what is more mature. And the real question we ask is that Christian maturity, what does that look, react, and feel like? And that's the amazing discovery for us in the series, that Galatians 5, the fruits of the Spirit, aren't just a list of things that we tick and we say, I do that. But it comes from a place of recognizing it flows from the Holy Spirit that is in us, through us. It comes from a place, and it can only happen when we are fully submitted to Christ. Then His character and His nature can flow through us. So it's a result from submission to God. And that is then produced in our lives and seen by other people as fruits. So it's not a to-do list and a checklist. I've done it this week, so now I can carry on, right? So let's take a look at Galatians 5, where we find the scripture that says, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, which are those 4 topics that we covered. And for this week, kindness. I looked at kindness and I thought, kindness, what can one say about kindness? And then when I worked through this, I realized it's such a condensed piece of scripture that we're going to look at that's just mind-blowing. So I'd encourage you to strap in, fasten your seatbelts, because this is going to get interesting. So you can't argue that in our world, in our life, what we need is more kindness. But there's also an other side to kindness. Kindness can be dangerous. Kindness, when it's perceived as tolerance, you're okay with certain things, because that could be misinterpreted as consent. And that doesn't play well within the ideology of toxic behaviors. Because within that context, often kindness is misinterpreted as niceness. Kindness is other-centered behavior. When I'm kind, I'm focused on other people. Here's the interesting part. It's acting on the best interest of others. But what we need to understand is it comes from a sense of love, empathy, and compassion. Niceness is often self-centered. It's trying to please others. It's designed to avoid causing waves and ensure that people like you. Can you see the difference? It's a vast difference. And what we'll also see is that nice isn't necessarily kind. And kindness does not always present as nice. Let's read that again. Nice isn't necessarily kind, and kindness does not always present nice. I told you, this morning session is going to blow your mind on different levels. The Greek word that we find for kindness is the word Christos, which sounds a lot like Christos, which is Christ. But what it means is to be fit for use, to be useful. So kindness implies that it is something that is useful. Kindness, from where we find it, from the Old English, is from a word called kinde, which means kin, class, or family. That connection leads us back to Genesis 1, where God creates man in his likeness, kind of like him. So what we discover is that kindness was built into us as humans. We're designed to be kind. But, and here's the big but. No, don't go there. Here's the big, let's rethink this kindness. Because as we know, every part of our being was affected by the brokenness of sin. Every part of our human nature was affected by sin. Also kindness that was built into us by God. Can you see why we need to focus on kindness? Because kindness, according to the world, is the broken, sinful way of kindness, which is not what God designed for us. So what we need to do is we need to unpack what does kindness look, act, and react like, so that we can evaluate how kind or how unkind we are to people. Jesus stated his purpose. Jesus said, I have come so that I can restore us as people, our body, our minds, and our soul. It's important because he said, I've come so that you can have life and life in the full. You can only have life in the full when your body, your mind, and your soul is restored. So Jesus modeled for us what true human kindness looks like. And this is what I love about Jesus. He didn't tell us, he didn't give us a lecture. And we read a lecture that he gave his disciples on when you are kind, you are supposed to. He went and he did something. And I think also, when we read the Bible, especially the New Testament, we fall into the trap of thinking it's just another parable. It's just another story. This is something, and when we read this, I need you to really look at it from the perspective of, here's a situation that played out. Remember we said, what does kindness look, act, and react like? Here's a situation that required something from Jesus. He gives information, but then he goes and he acts and he reacts. And we get to evaluate, what does it look like for me in my life? And in this snapshot that we find, that we step into, it's the Feast of Tabernacles. And it's a Jewish feast that all the Jews went to Jerusalem for. So Jesus was in the temple. You can imagine a lot of people are there, which is what the Pharisees and the people of the law thought, well, this is the perfect time to start to sow dissent when it comes to Jesus, in front of all of these people. Because when all of these people see the real Jesus, Jesus is exposed as who he's not, who he said he is, then a lot of people will follow us and start to turn. Because they were unhappy with the fact that Jesus claimed to be the Messiah. And this caused a great deal of tension for the religious leaders because it impacted their status. So the Pharisees called the temple guard to arrest Jesus, but they didn't, and he left. And that's where we find our story, that we have summed it up for us in John 8 verse 2. Now we've got specialists that spent nearly a year on John. So this passage will be Not new to them, but for us, very insightful. At dawn, he appeared again in the temple courts, where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery." And then they continue. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such woman. Now what do you say? Can you see what's playing out in front of our eyes? It's early morning, right? Kind of the 8:30 service. Everybody's here. And then they come in. We're about to start. I'm not saying I'm Jesus, please. That's not the point of the message. But we're about to start, and suddenly a group of people come in, and they bring this woman in front of all of us, talking to me, but really talking to you. And they say, here's this woman caught in adultery. This is what the law says. Now what do you say? Can you see that it's a setup? Because there's a lot going on in this passage. Because if we read this, the first thing we ask is, if they were caught in adultery, they would know who the man is, but where is the man? Right? Obviously somebody tampered with evidence. No. The point wasn't justice and the point wasn't fairness. The point was to make another point, which wasn't the point. Because surely he should receive the same punishment, but he doesn't. See, the woman is only a pawn. And she's brought in front of Jesus because what they try and do is ask a question. Ask a question that is a setup for a trap. And they want to use that as a basis for it. And we know this because it literally says that to us. They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. They knew where they were working towards. And they used this woman to confirm what they were setting Jesus up for. And what they're doing is they're trying to highlight the contradiction between the teaching that Jesus has been teaching about God's love. And they're trying to show that you can't marry up God's love with the teaching of the law. How do you bring love and law into the same space? And this is what they're trying to expose. What they're doing is the opposite of kind. It's ugly, it's cruel, and it's disgraceful. Because they're using a human being to make a point. And then we read this. But just think what we would do. We would go straight into explanation mode, right? I need to defend my stance on this. Whether I'm for Trump or for Ramaphosa, but something's playing out and I need to defend my viewpoint. But Jesus does something different. He bent down and he started to write on the ground with his finger. He bent down. The Greek word is kuptua, which means to bend, to go down, to lower yourself. And that's usually connected with what a servant does, not what Jesus does. So this word where a servant would humble himself before his master, that same word is used to describe what Jesus does in front of this woman that's accused of adultery. Women already in their society didn't have a high status. Now she's accused of adultery, and they have witnesses, so it lowers her status even more. And Jesus goes and he bends down. For us, we like, it makes sense. How else is he going to reach the ground to write on the ground? But we don't understand the language that's used. Because if we said, and Jesus bent down and wrote, we're like, it's logical, makes sense. But the word literally means humbled himself down and wrote on the ground. So Jesus does something. He takes on the posture of a servant. which is unthinkable for a man, especially one with so much authority to do so in front of a woman. Guys, next year, Valentine's Day, go humble yourself in front of your wife. And if she's asked, what are you doing? It's like, koop to her. Koop to her. But the question we're asking also is, but what is Jesus writing? The answer is we don't know. Because what he's writing is not important. But we think that's important. Koop to her is important. He humbles himself. But also, there's another symbolism that's playing out. Remember Exodus and the law? Because this whole thing is about the law. How did the Israelites receive the law? You guys are getting PTSD from trivia, right? Clay tablets. And God wrote with his finger on the clay tablets. And Jesus is writing with his finger on the ground. So what he's writing isn't important. How it's playing out is. Verse 7. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her. So he straightens up. The word is anakiptua, the opposite of kiptua. So he's done with humbling. Now he responds and he stands up. He straightens up. Jesus literally and figuratively stands up. He claims back his authority. For us also, what they implying, what they want is an familiar concept. We don't stone people anymore. We hardly send people to jail anymore. But that's a point for another sermon. In stoning in those days, they would first tie the person's hands and then push them into a well that's at least twice their height. Which means you stand at a height, at ground level in terms of the person, relationally to the person at height, and they would take a rock and throw it on the person. With their hands being tied, they can't lift up their hands and defend themselves. If they're not dead because of the first strike, everybody else throws a rock. It's a horrible and a gruesome way to die. And this is what Jesus is saying. He's saying this. And this is where the story gets really good. Jesus says, you want me to judge? Fine. But then everyone plays. They say to Jesus, judge her. He says, I will judge if you want me to. But if I judge, everyone gets judged. Verse 8. Again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. So he leaves that hanging in the air. And he keeps to us again and he writes on the ground. And Jesus is saying the purpose of the law is to serve God and protect people. You need to choose which interpretation of the law you want to apply. Do you want to apply my way of seeing the law, or do you want to apply your way of seeing the law? If mine, then put down your rock. If it's yours, then everyone plays. Verse 9. At this, those who heard began to go away, one at a time. The older ones first. I think there's a lesson in there. The older ones first, until only Jesus was left, with a woman still standing there. They all leave. They leave, and in leaving, their leaving becomes an admission of guilt. I'm guilty, so I'm going to leave. It also becomes a concession of the debate. We've lost this round. The only one left is the one that could throw the rock. And he's the one that puts the rock down. Here's the thing. They left thinking that Jesus was okay with adultery and that he was indifferent to the law of Moses. But what's interesting is Jesus wasn't concerned with how they could misrepresent what happened. Misrepresent because not only are they misinterpreting, but they are going and telling a different story. But Jesus doesn't care about that. To Jesus, that is not what's important. He didn't try to control the narrative. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. Now this bothers most of us because Jesus is not condemning this. So what we are thinking is, then Jesus must be condoning this if he's not publicly speaking out against it. And that's the divisive trap that we fall in. A trap where we think it's either one or the other. We succumb to this idea that somehow tolerance is the same as consent. Jesus wasn't concerned with how everyone else thought. But Jesus wasn't done either. Publicly, he was acting on her behalf. And in the stunning display of grace that Jesus shows her, he then turns to her and in a very private and personal way speaks to the woman. And he says this, "Go now and leave your life of sin." He doesn't do this in front of the others, because that would explain to them that I'm not okay with this. But it would humiliate her. He's much more concerned about her than he is about how they would misrepresent what has happened. Jesus tells her, "Stop. What you are doing is not good for you." He doesn't say, "Stop. What you are doing paints me in a bad light." He's saying to her, "Stop. What you are doing is not good for you." His approach is the antithesis of the religious leaders. He wasn't just nice to her, because kindness prioritized her real needs and extended beyond comfort. He defended her, but then he spoke the truth to her. What does Christ-like kindness look, act, and react like? It's two essentials. Jesus bent down and said what his words said, that Jesus came to serve humankind. So in his act, he acted what his words communicated. I have come to serve you. And Jesus straightened up. But Jesus wasn't just standing up for others. He was lifting someone up with him. He elevated their dignity. John 1 describes Jesus as being full of grace and full of truth. All grace, all truth, all the time. He didn't compromise on one or the other. He was full of both. To compromise on one is not helpful or useful or kind. Jesus is at the intersection between kindness and truth. It's where they overlap that we find kindness. Truth without grace is condemning, and grace without truth is condoning. Truth without grace is condemning, and grace without truth is condoning. And it can't be either one of them. Human kindness is where they overlap. So often when we think we are kind, we're just nice to people. We are excusing what shouldn't be there. It takes a difficult conversation. It forces me to become uncomfortable and have a conversation with somebody. And Jesus has modeled something for us. That doesn't happen in front of a group of people. It happens in private. But it asks of me to take that extra step and have that uncomfortable conversation. It gives us a view on how we raise our children. I can't just excuse for the sake of not creating any waves. I need to step in as a parent. It helps us in how we connect with people at work. It changes the dynamic for us. I can't excuse myself by not having that conversation and allowing that person to help themselves to other people's lunch, whatever the bugbear is. There's hundreds of them in a workplace. But it's not a conversation in front of other people. It's a one-on-one conversation. And it's for the sake of the other person. And that's the difference. Where the focus is on the other person and the focus isn't on me. Now here's something that's interesting. Biological neural experts have found that when we are kind to other people, where it's selfless, it's not in our own interest, there's nothing in there for me. It's something that releases 4 key hormones in our body. First of all, it's serotonin, which produces a calming effect. The second one is dopamine, which is the pleasure chemical that gets released. Endorphins get released, which improves your mood. And oxytocin gets released, which decreases stress. When you step into a space where you help someone, where you benefit nothing from it, but you are in that space where you make a difference in somebody else's life, this happens in your body. Do you know what the only other thing is that does this? Right? I can see you thinking. Is when a mother breastfeeds. Imagine that. The only other thing that does this in your body is when a mother breastfeeds. It's the only thing that keeps that baby alive. Like literally. It forces the mother to create a biological connection to a child. That's why mothers are different to fathers when it comes to their child. But when we help others, that's what happens to us. That's why Jesus wants us to be kind. Because it does something in us. But it only happens when we do it out of a selfless, I'm here for you. There's nothing in this for me. That is the move behind Love Nelson Mandela Bay. Apart from get off your chair and go and make a difference. The other big driver is we model and put into practice what Jesus taught us. Not from a theoretical message, but in terms of what he did when he walked on earth. And we want to model that, and we want to do that. So Love NMB does exactly that. To create a space where somebody can step into serving other people for the sake of them. So what we're going to close with this morning is a recap on our previous project that we did 2 Saturdays ago, and just get to hear from some of the volunteers why they did it, why they are there, and what they experienced. So let's join the team that helped out at Morningside High School. It's a school in our community, and because we want to create a move within this community, we said, let's focus on them, let's make a difference there, and help these teachers that are going 120% for the kids that they are serving, and go and make a difference and an impact in their lives.
So today's my birthday, and I decided to invite my community group to come and share with me and share in this project to bring a little color into this school and to bring a little color into this community. Some people might ask why. Why am I doing this on my birthday? This is because I am giving what I have to give, because that's what Jesus would do. I am trying to live that out and trying to be the best Jesus follower that I can be, and I can't think of any other way than giving, and on a day like this, to be giving and not receiving.
Hi everyone, so we're from the Rotaract Club of Port Elizabeth, and we're basically a group of youngsters who love helping others and spending our time and using our time, our most valuable resource, to help others. We're ages 19 to 30, and we do community projects around Port Elizabeth, helping old age homes, animal shelters, children's homes. And so we wanted to get involved with Love NMB, with their One House a Month project, because this is something that we enjoy, we're passionate about, and we figured, two communities coming together to help another community is the way to go.
I'm Sergeant Bankis. I'm from Kubika Park SAPS, sector manager there. I joined Love NMB last week. Did a presentation, they did a presentation. I enjoyed it a lot. It just reminded me of the passion that over the years that have basically grew apart and grew away. And yeah, today I'm here by Morningside with them again. I got a few of the guys that I know. We came out and joined them. The reason why I'm here today is the passion that Love NMB have, and basically they just surrendering their everything to the community and to Nelson Mandela Bay, and for that I am here, because that is what I truly want to be selfless for Nelson Mandela Bay.